is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Joe Perino, who is a seasoned industrial strategist, consultant, and engineer with over 4 decades of experience across the energy, process, and manufacturing sectors. As a president and CEO of Pertex Management and Technology Consulting, Joe advises startups, technology companies, and industrial clients on how to drive operational transformation through digital innovation. Joe, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Paul. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. So where are you calling from today?
I'm in Houston.
Great. Well, let's just jump right into it. You know, you're an experienced operator and investor as well. What do operators and investors get wrong about industrial transformation and how to de-risk programs early?
First of all, you have to agree on a definition of industrial transformation, which is really about business model change and not technology per se. And so it's easy to get caught up into that. So what you're really trying to do is you're trying to do a technology-enabled business model change, which produces an improvement in your business, and not just incrementally, but generally a leap forward in that sense. And a lot of companies start on fishing on this. One of the themes that we developed at LNS when I was at LNS prior to retiring was the idea of a vision to value pivot, in which you start out with vision, IT plays around with technology, but the problem is you never get the operational side of the company on board. They don't scale. They don't embed it in the business. So you don't get transformation, because unless the users who are running the business model change, then you can't impose it on it. You can't do it for them. You have to do it with them. So a lot of people miss on that. And this whole theme of pivot was also recently highlighted by Jeffrey Moore, who you know wrote Crossing the Chasm, and he continues to be quite active in this space on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Yeah.
Great. Well, you do a lot of work in industrial IoT and edge computing. Where does the ROI usually show up in upstream, midstream, and refining applications? And how does that impact capital allocation?
The biggest place it's shown up is in predictive analytics right now. So if I give you the phases of analytics, you got descriptive, what happened, diagnostic, why it happened, predictive, what could happen and when. That's been taken up tremendously in the industry. In other words, I'm monitoring a pump. When's the pump going to fail? Well, now we're moving on to prescriptive, which is, what do I do? Is it plan A, plan B, or plan C? And then you have prognostic analytics, which is, if I pick plan A, what is the likely outcome? I'm going to get a positive result. So getting those last two is part of the maturity curve that's going on. The other part of this is the shift from, at first we shifted from on-prem to cloud, and now we're taking a more hybrid approach, which is edge and cloud together, because a lot of things are going to run at the edge, and that's picked up quite a bit. So where's the ROI? Well, on predictive maintenance, it's pretty obvious there. If you prevent a pump from failing, that takes down your process. It's pretty easy to figure out what the cost of downtime is and the cost of lost production. So that's fairly straightforward. But a lot of other incremental things going on in the background aren't so easy to measure. So it's very important that when you do these programs, that you actually connect with problems that need to be solved that have a measurable impact on whatever it is: time to market, production, quality, these factors, the traditional factors that you measure your business with.
Well, you've also gotten into AI and ML, and you're implementing those applications as well. And everybody is at some level, but in the industrial space, what do you find is the key to making sure those projects actually go into cash flow and they actually can scale beyond a pilot?
Well, that's a very good question, because most of them don't produce what's happened. In fact, I just saw a note today. MIT's Project Nando released a report that said the state of the AI business in July 2025 has said over 300 enterprises were analyzed and 95% failed to deliver the productivity gains they initially promised. That's a whopping figure. So a lot of people are not getting started out on the right foot to do this. And again, alignment within the business and ownership in the model. The proper measurement techniques need to be made there. It's more about changing the way you work and less about what specific AI or machine learning algorithm or whatever else is going on. Now, having said that, we are maturing in our use of AI. So we start out with machine learning, which is the predictive side. And now we're into direct reinforcement learning. And now as those tools get applied, the hottest thing going on today is the move toward agentic AI, where a series of AI agents actually coordinate the work themselves and make the decision themselves. Because the current theme is, what's the time to make a decision and execute? So decision speed, eliminating latency. So if someone's on the factory floor and they notice something, do they have to run it all the way up the management tree before they can do anything about it? Well, that time lag kills them because that's lost production, part may break down, etc. So the idea is to provide the support on the front line so that these decisions get made, they get intercepted if you can prevent them, and the resolution is quick. So this is where AI is moving to be a co-partner or a co-collaborator with the people on the front line.
Great. Well, let's talk about digital twin stacks, say for brownfield assets. What's the challenge there for data readiness, change management, and vendor selection?
Well, you hit the first one is data management. You've got to have your data in good condition and collect all of it. And there's always a problem with that. There's missing data, there's bad data, there's noisy data, there's all of this. So you have to have a data foundation first and foremost. And then the question is, what's a digital twin? Is it of a part, of a process, of a person? So you got to define that. And what type of twin can you do? So some things are modeled easily. I'm a chemical engineer by degree, so we use process simulation from products like AspenTech that allow us to model the process and then compare it with the actual. So that's your twin there. But you can do a twin of a pump or whatever else it is. And you can build either a physics twin or a data twin, because the data represents what the thing is actually doing, or some hybrid of both, which is typically what's been done. So there you get the twins going on. And so this is also picked up. But one of the biggest issues is, who builds the twin? How do you maintain the twin? How many people do you need around to make this stuff work? And that's been a challenge. A lot of projects get kicked off the ground. The vendor comes in, and then you find out that you have to pay the vendor to be there to do all the support because you don't have the people to do the work. And then it fails, it dies, it gets turned off, and you wasted some money and you didn't get what you wanted. That happens a lot now.
Well, great. Well, let's talk about cybersecurity. As a board level risk, how does that shape the diligence for an industrial tech investment?
Well, it's first and foremost on the checklist, because risk management, especially in the process industries, is what it's all about. Safety. And of course, you can't have any of the modern networking, cloud, and all that without having cybersecurity. So cyber is, you might think it's owned by the IT department, which it is partially, but risk management normally is owned by the CFO because he's looking at financial risk and all the other risks, reputational risk, et cetera. Cyber can ruin all of those, as we've seen. We saw them shut down the Colonial Pipeline system earlier this year. We've seen hacks at banks. So, I mean, if you don't have your moat protecting the castle, then you can't operate. So this is really one of the first things you get together once you pull your team together, you get a governance model together. You've got to have a cyber plan before you implement anything.
Well, great. Well, you work in asset intensive sectors, and you coach a lot of or advise startups on the go to market for going into them. What do enterprise buyers need to hear or see from these startups before they'll engage?
Well, just like any other enterprise buyer, they want to see a company that A, the technology works, and B, they have a solid business plan. That, particularly if you're an investor, they want to have a solid business plan that says this company is going to grow, provide a return, and be around. And as you know, because you're in this business all the time, I don't know, 9 out of 10 fail, 8 out of 10 fail. Mm-hmm. And from a VC viewpoint, they're successful if they get one 10-bagger and 2 good ones and the other 7 fail. But if you're in the other 7, you're not very happy. But that's the game that's played. So, as a startup, you need to understand how to play this game. And basically, you need to have a message for the audience you're pitching to, which is one for the investor and one for the prospective client. And you got to, and most of those are the same slides, by the way, but not all of them are. So you need to know what you're doing there. And nobody wants to buy a product and then find out it's going to go out of business in another week, literally, or in another year. So people are looking for all of those signals to say that, is this a sound business plan? And yeah, the tech works. And I see, since I spend most of my time now with seed, pre-seed startups and so forth, most of the time it's the business side, and they have a good tech idea, but it dies. And that's because there's no business to be made there, or the economics don't work, which is the case of a lot of this. The economics don't work, even if the tech works.
How do you see the role of industry consortia and accelerators such as the Rice Alliance in forging credible pilots and financing the pathways for these startups?
Oh, I think this is a very important space. So I got started in the startup area back in 2016 with the Houston Tech Center, which goes back to like 2002. So it was a nonprofit pro bono. We're going to help friends and family seed and pre-seed people. And around 2018, the city and a number of other people basically closed that shop and started Houston Exponential. So they invited in Greentown Labs and a few others. Ion came up, Canon came up, and then the Rice Alliance has been around for, I think, 23 or 24 years. The energy side, about 20 of that. And so it's been a big effort in the Houston area to get us on the map as a startup area. Now, PitchBook has us at like number 48, but I think if you narrowed the pitch book down just to the energy sector, including renewables and things like that, we probably would be much higher on the list. So there's a big effort in this area to keep Houston's money in Houston instead of in your backyard in Austin or Boston or the Valley or New York or Toronto. And so I'm keen on trying to help local companies do well in our market here in Houston and in Texas in general.
Great. Well, you're there in the oil and gas patch there, and you work
Yeah.
with a lot of data ops and standards and so forth. What are some shortcuts to interoperability that investors should look for? How do you make these things work better?
Well, there are industry standards that are being adopted for communication. In the case of agentic AI, there's a model context protocol for handoffs, which is the big guys are beginning to pick this up, meaning Microsoft, OpenAI, et cetera. And then there's also an interchange for the model to model connection. And so the idea is that, and typically what happens is if somebody invents something and then it becomes a standard. In other words, the standards committee doesn't invent it out of blue. Someone does something and it becomes a standard. And then everybody adopts it. So like the Tesla fast charger, it's sort of become the standard. So all the other EV cars do that so they can use so that it becomes interchangeable. So usually there's a leader that does that. So that's being worked on right now. There's plenty of open standards out there, but integration is still of a lot of effort. Everybody publishes their API or something, and then some. You got to have a consultant or somebody or your own people come in and glue it all together, and that's hard to support. Then things get changed. Somebody makes an upgrade over here, and then you lose the handshake, and then you got to go back in and fix it. Ideally, this stuff should basically be self-managing. So we're working on that. I think it's still going to be a few more years, but I would expect by the end of the decade that things should be running fairly smoothly there. Although this is a very fast moving market, technically. New things get invented all the time. Every year or two, there's something that, new.
Well, sustainability and emissions are, the hot topic these days. Where can we find digital tools that create measurable reductions in those and investable business models that we can fund?
Well, good question. Just because we have a new administration that's placing less emphasis on emissions doesn't mean that that's going away. So what we're seeing is, especially with the use of twins and other things, is we're bringing in AI and machine learning and other things to be able to do a better job of predicting emissions, optimizing operations in terms of efficiency and so forth. Generally, the more efficient you are, the less energy you use, the less emissions you have. Also, you're able to do a better job of handling your own emissions, which is scope 1, and the people you draw from, which is scope 2. Now, scope 3 is a bit of a stretch because that's somebody way down on the other side of the planet that's using something that you guys produced. So that's a little bit harder. But this is definitely an area that's still getting a lot of attention. I suspect that as we go forward, instead of all these subsidies, we may see a carbon tax so that you can actually plug that into your optimization, whether your logistics or the plant or whatever, and calculate where you need to be And then if you need to buy credits, you buy some. And if you don't, you don't. And the system starts to work that way because the subsidies have distorted this thing way worse than it should be. And also it's made it a lot more expensive. So if we would probably change to that, we would probably do a better job.
Great. Well, let's look at your career. You've transversed from process engineer to consultant analyst and many other things in between. What did that journey teach you about buying, selling, and scaling industrial tech?
You hit on an interesting note because I'm one of the few people that like to brag about having 16 jobs and having been laid off 9 times, most of which have happened in the last 10 or 12 years once the oil price crashed in 2014. And so I've had to reinvent myself and learn to do things differently. So I went from being an engineer, I went into sales and marketing, then I went into consulting. I've managed IT, went back into engineering, run projects for large refinery modernization. And then I ended up with a call out of the blue to be an analyst, which is what took me to L&S. And then I left L&S in 2022. So all throughout that career, I could say, looking back, the dots connect, but I had no idea where I would end up when I came out of school and took a job in a chemical plant, that I'd be where I am today. So lessons learned, you don't give up. You have to be persistent. It isn't about brilliance of knowledge or brilliance of intelligence. It's about persistence, stay focused, self-discipline, and pay attention to what's going on, and you will land on your feet. And so after I'm 70 years old now, so it's taken me a long time, and I've managed to land on my feet every time I've had a disruption. Let's put it that way. And in some cases, some of the disruption set me on a new course that I wouldn't have been on had I not been disrupted. So you have to turn the disruption into a opportunity.
Well, great. Well, in the venture capital world, there's so much they talk around tech, like enterprise software, which when you look at it, it's really more light tech. It's really not deep tech. But you deal with deep tech. How is that different from the light tech world as far as, buying and selling and investing in those industries?
Well, a lot of the light tech, I liked, if I had to divide up industries, so light tech might be, retail, back office, things like that. And the deep tech, at least in our end, industrial, the whole risk profile of running those businesses is completely different because retail stores don't blow up and refineries can. And so they're extremely sensitive about what they put in, obviously, first with cybersecurity and then anything else they put in for a solution. And so it's a much more sensitive thing. And therefore, you need to do your diligence a lot more than the others. And you have to understand what these people are doing and the technology. A lot of the other lighter tech people, investors will go look and say, well, what's the team of people I have? I'll just give them some money because they've had 5 startups before, so they'll come up with something. Well, that's not going to sell really well in the industrial space. There needs to be a lot more substance to what you're pitching before you gain the confidence of the clients as well as the investors.
You can bootstrap enterprise software and light tech because it's mostly software and a few developers, and you can put something together to get it going and then work it up from there. But industrial tech, you need pilot plants, you need millions of dollars to run these tests and so forth. And your local angel is just not going to fund you that $1 million anytime soon. So how do you address that?
Yeah, if you're just doing software, you can take 2 guys and give them 3 weeks and they'll slap something together. Now, what we're dealing with, particularly in the group that I'm with called Global Energy Mentors, we get people that have to go through a technology development phase, which is a prototype, a pilot plant, and then scale and fund that. And then on top of that, they need a business plan. And so this is usually not a 1 or 2 year journey. This is a 3, 5, 7 year journey. And so therefore the investment, the patience level of the investor is going to have to be considerable. And lots of things can happen in 7 or 8 or 9 years. And so that's a lot different than if you're doing something more lightweight in the back office or whatever else. You'll know fairly quickly whether that's going anywhere or not. So the monetization timeline is different, and the investor needs to understand that. And so does the startup.
So you touched on the Global Entrepreneur Mentorship Program. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that was a team of people that when we were at the Houston Tech Center, we had a bunch of retired guys that came in and we would get a pitch, usually typically every Thursday morning, 1 or 2 pitches. Then we would stand up and provide feedback. And so when that went away, a couple of those fellas formed what we call Global Energy Mentors, which is purely a pro bono organization, loosely associated guys. We have about 20 core people and about 50 in total. So when I left LNS in 2022, I called up a buddy of mine who I had met there and said, hey, can I join the club? And I did join the club. So we do that. And then we're active with the University of St. Thomas and their engineering college, but we are also connected with UH, with Rice, and so forth. And we've been over at Greentown Labs and ION and the Canon and a few other things. And so we have probably now, a dozen or 15 companies that we're coaching at any one time. And I lead a couple of the teams on that. And then I still do a little bit of sideline things on my own, but that's what keeps me busy. And that's how I met you and 10 Capital, because one of my colleagues, Hani El-Shawi, invited me to that last December lunch presentation that when you were here in Houston. And so when I saw this and I followed up with a couple of the software firms that you introduced me to, I got now more involved with following 10 Capital.
Great. Well, appreciate that. Well, in the last minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I don't know. We've covered a lot of ground here. I think we're in an interesting time period where, in addition to the usual uncertainties of tech investing, which I think right now I would characterize as the hype probably peaked around 2020, 2021 in terms of valuations. So it's not 10 plus anymore for software. It's 5 to 8 and probably 2 to 5 for hardware, something like that. In addition to that, we have a lot of uncertainty with the new administration, with tariffs, shifting tax, financial, the Fed, all this going on. So maneuvering through this and making a smart investment is even more challenging now than it was 5 years ago. And I think that's going to be tough to get through until all this settles out. We'll have to see how it works. On the other hand, there's a lot of investment coming back to the U.S. or no shortage of capital. So there's every opportunity to do well in this environment, despite its volatility and uncertainty.
Right. Well, so how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Well, you can reach me on my LinkedIn profile. Just reach out and send me a message, and we'll get connected, and we can go from there.
Great. Well, we'll put your contact details in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for inviting me to your podcast.
You're welcome. Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.